So I would say, and this is difficult in today's times, question everything you see and hear, whether it's from me or anybody else, because there is so much disinformation out there on everything. If you're watching the news, the nightly news, man, that is such a huge mistake. There is nothing true on there at all. So I would definitely say today more than ever, you have to question whether it's authority, whether it's conventional wisdom. I was always a natural-born cynic, so I never believed anything anyone told me. I had to figure all that stuff out for myself. And sometimes that was good and sometimes that was bad, but I think in the end, it's worked out pretty well.
This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
All right, Team PYP. Mary Lou Kaiser here. Welcome to today's episode of the Play Your Position podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today because, first of all, we're here for you. And second of all, when it's game day here at PYP, we have a lot of fun. We pass on some great inspirational content to you that you can use in your life. And today is no exception. My guest, Tim Yurek, is suited up. He is ready to take the field and bring us into his leadership journey. And he's coming to us from the beautiful state of Pennsylvania. So, Tim, are you ready for kickoff?
I am ready.
Yeah, I am ready too. So, team, here are some things I know about Tim. He is a highly accomplished financial consultant, veteran, and thought leader in his industry. As the founder and CEO of Tier 1 Capital, Tim has spent over 35 years helping thousands of people across the country achieve their financial goals. He specializes in growing businesses, attracting and retaining top talent, planning for business succession, and converting business equity into cash. With his global recognition and membership in the $1 Million Round Table, Tim offers valuable insights and strategies to his clients to help them achieve financial freedom. His expertise has been featured on major media outlets such as Bloomberg TV. And he was sharing with me that he's gearing up to launch his first podcast. And by the time this episode airs and you're hearing this, that podcast will be live. So you're going to want to check it out. So Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. And let's get right to it. Tell us your story about when you got the call to leadership. How old were you? What was going on in your life? Give us some context about why you're doing as well as you are today in what you do as a leader.
Well, I've always seemed to be a leader, and I never thought of it that way. As a kid, people just came to me, my friends would come to me, and I would be the guy organizing the basketball games and the football games, et cetera, et cetera. And then, as time went by, I was the guy that people seemed to look to. And as time went by, I played football in high school. I played football in college. I was voted team captain in college. So, I've always felt that not that I wanted to be a leader. It was just, that's just the way I was. And, when I got into the financial services business, I was being a team player. I was doing things the way the industry taught me to do things. And I was chugging along, doing fairly well, but I was stuck financially. And when you have a situation or a moment where it's like it's an epiphany and you realize that, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble here. Mm-hmm. So I had that moment in 1993. So for context, at that time, I'm 31 years old. I'm single. I have my own home. I'm visiting my parents for Christmas. My brother and my sister were there. I'm the middle child of 3 children. And we're talking about the good old days. And the good old days
of the 80s.
well, these were probably the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
But so the good old days, my dad was a welder. He worked for coal companies, and he never made more than $18,000 in any one year.
Wow.
But he managed to, buy a house, him and my mom.
Mm-hmm.
They raised 3 children. So all that being said, we're sitting around the dinner table at Christmas time, and we're talking about the good old days. And the good old days were my dad got paid on Thursdays. He would come home, give my mom his pay. My mom would have dinner ready for him and for the family. And then after dinner on Thursday, she would take my dad's check, go to the grocery store, buy groceries for the week, cash the check, and use the whatever, leftover money for paying bills. And that was pretty much every Thursday, but there were occasionally Thursdays where my dad would come home and he wouldn't have his pay.
Mm.
And see, the backstory on that is the guy who owned the plant, his wife did the payroll, and the man would go home for lunch, get the payroll, bring it back to the plant on Thursdays, but sometimes he would stop off at a bar.
Oh.
And he wouldn't make it back to the plant by the time my dad's shift was over.
Oh, no.
So those days after dinner, my mom would load me, my brother, and my sister in the car, and we would sit in front of this man's house until he got home from the bar.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
And so we would get my dad's pay, and everything was good. But the good old days that we were reminiscing about during the Christmas of 1993 was the time that my mom's car wouldn't start after we got my dad's pay.
Mm.
And that, as a kid, was very embarrassing. Now, understand, I was probably like 8 or 9 years old.
Yes.
And so my brother knocks on the door, asks the guy if we could use the phone. We call my uncle. My uncle comes up. Car won't start. So we ended up, my uncle gave us a ride home. And, my parents had to get the car towed and fixed and whatever. So I remember, here's the epiphany moment. I say to my mom, I said, "Ma, why? Like, what were we doing there?" And she said, "We're waiting for Daddy's pay." And I said, "Why didn't you wait for the next day?" And I'll never forget, Mary Lou, the look my mom shot me. She said, "Honey, we lived pay to pay. If I didn't have your dad's that pay cashed, they were going to shut off the electricity, or they were going to, shut off the phone or the gas." And it was at that moment that I realized, now here I am, I'm 31 years old. I'm doing really well, making like 6, 7 times what my dad ever made.
Yeah.
I'm single. I own my own house. And there were times that I had to borrow money from my dad to pay my mortgage. I was living pay to pay. Now,
oh my gosh.
I'm in financial services. I've got insider advice and information, and I'm struggling. And I'm thinking there is something wrong here. And that's where it hit me right across the forehead.
Mm.
And I said, things got to change here. So I made some adjustments on my own to free up cash flow. And then I found that there were people out there in the industry that teach advisors how to find cash flow within your clients, find money within their current cash flow to be able to save more without reducing expenses or without having to reduce lifestyle. And that was a game changer for me personally. And then I said, hey, if this worked for me, I am not the only person that's suffering this cash flow issue. I bet there's a lot of people out there that could benefit from this. And that's what I did. And that's how I grew my business.
Mm.
And more importantly, now I've pretty much transitioned to working with business owners and showing them how to free up cash flow to fund their own retirement, their exit planning, their succession planning, or to incentivize key people within their organization without having any impact or minimal impact on their current cash flow.
Wow. That, first of all, that story is so vivid in my mind. And I imagine there are listeners who can completely relate to having an experience as a child, witnessing parents living, paycheck to paycheck, being afraid of having something shut off or actually experiencing something being shut off because of something, something just didn't go according to plan. And how interesting that despite your success at 31, you had perhaps subconsciously absorbed that model. Like you were living on paper, it looked like you were, doing great, but you still didn't have any excess.
Exactly. And
right.
not only did I not have excess, I didn't have access. Right. So let me give you some context here. At that time, I had over $150,000 in a 401k. I had $50,000 of equity in my house, but I couldn't put my hands on $500 for a mortgage.
Wow. That says something right there, about. So when you work with clients and you work with businesses, particularly business owners who, as you just described, may not think there's money there and you help them find it. I'm trying to think of how to phrase this question. So what you experienced in the 70s, witnessing your dad who made no more than 18 grand a year, in today's dollars, a family of 5, okay, making whatever 18 grand in 2023 dollars would probably still be hand to mouth with one parent, working. And I'm curious, this is a little bit of a side note, and we'll circle back into what you do with, as far as the value of the dollar and we hear so much about how young people like your father and mother were at one time, they can't buy a house. The real estate has just gone up so much that model that those of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s and saw it with our parents is very different today. Young people are coming out of college. They're not getting married. They're not starting families right away. Many of them cite because it's too expensive. To have children is too expensive. And they say, forget about buying a house, especially if they're living in any kind of the major metropolitan areas, San Fran, LA, Portland, Seattle, New York, all up and down the Eastern Seaboard, perhaps in the Midwest and lesser, more rural communities, it's still possible. But I'm just curious what your perspective is on money and its ability to buy a lifestyle today that is tied to what the American dream was once promoted as, and if you think that's still alive.
That is an excellent question. And here's what I will tell you. The way they promote the American dream, it is totally inaccessible if you're following conventional wisdom. You cannot get there. And there is no...
And the conventional wisdom is what?
Well, the conventional wisdom is do well in school, get good grades, get a good job, your company will take care of you, and you'll buy a house with a picket fence, and you'll get married to the girl of your dreams or the man of your dreams, and you'll have 3 children, and everything will be, unicorns and rainbows. And that does not happen today. So here's a great situation. Let's say you go through college and you do very well, and then you apply to go to medical school or dental school. So I'm going to use dental school as an example. But your parents they're not rich. They might make $150,000 between them, and you're one of 2 or 3 children that they're putting through college, and all of a sudden you have college, student debt from your undergrad years. Then you have student debt from your dental school years. And then you get your dental license. You throw out your shingle, hopefully, and hope to have business coming in. Well, the problem is you can't get a loan to start your dental practice. Why? Here, think of it this way. You have the equivalent of a mortgage payment in undergrad debt. Then you have the equivalent of a mortgage payment in dental school debt. Then you have, the price of a car today is incredibly high. So you have basically another half a mortgage in car payments. And now you want to get a loan with no history or no earnings history from a bank in order to buy a practice. Can't do it. I have clients who are dentists, and what they do is they go to dental schools, recruit dentists, have them come into their practice, give them a 5-year guarantee of income, and then give them a pathway to buying into the practice. Because these kids today can't afford or can't get loans in order to open up their own dental practice.
Wow.
So to answer your question, the American dream is not attainable if you're doing things the conventional way, right? So that's the issue. Borrowing for undergrad, borrowing for graduate school, and then borrowing to buy a practice, no bank is probably going to give you any money.
Sure. Yeah.
And here's the fallacy that people have sort of bought into. And the fallacy is, well, the problem these kids have is that they don't make enough money. Well, see, that was that. And my response to that is, no, I was making really good money back in 93 and I was broke. And I was broke because I was following the rules the way the system conditioned me to do it. Conventional wisdom. And when you do that, you're surrendering control of your money and your cash flow on a daily basis. And then when it's time to go and when you hit an emergency or there's an opportunity, you don't have any access to money to take advantage of the opportunity or to get your way out of the emergency.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you have just painted a picture that is extremely clear and accurate. How is what you do the contrarian wisdom advice to the conventional? I mean, when you work with clients and you help them find that wealth that's locked up, give us an overview of what it's like to work with you and why you have been as successful as you have been helping so many businesses do just that.
So this I think is this example or this scenario will paint that picture for you and your audience. The financial services industry teaches people that the pathway to success is to find the right products, the best bank account, the best checking account, the best CD, the best mutual fund, the best money manager, the best advisor, the best insurance policy, the best. Those products are just tools. I'm going to use a golf analogy. Those products are the equivalent of a golf club. Mm-hmm. And what the industry trains us to think is that in order to be successful financially, you need the best products, and then you're going to be ahead of everybody. And putting that in the golf context, buy the most expensive or the best golf club, and you're going to be a financial success. Well, guess what? I could buy Tiger Woods golf clubs, and I am not going to be a good golfer.
Me either.
Right? So, but the industry is out there selling Tiger Woods golf clubs.
Yeah.
Right? That's what the financial services industry does. Now, here's what we do. Our approach is to, rather than focus on the products, we focus on how you're using the products. So we focus on the financial golf swing. So if you want to get good at golf, 2 approaches. Approach number 1, buy the best products, you'll be the best golfer. Approach number 2, work on the swing, how you're using the club, how you're using your financial products. Nobody teaches their clients how to use their money. And that's what we do.
Mhm. That's a terrific metaphor. Thank you. Seriously, because money and investing and thinking about all the products is overwhelming for a lot of people. And I'm sure, you know that because you work with them every day. And I can imagine clients sitting across from you and you see their eyes roll back in their head because they, it's like it's not their vocabulary. They just want solutions, right? But if you
Right.
approach it from what you're saying, which is let's work on your swing. Let's work on your money swing because that's going to change the game. Clearly, that's not only allowed you to enjoy a really great business all these years, but you have hordes and hordes of clients who are happy because you helped improve their swing.
And that is so true. And one thing I found, so I know this works because I've done it personally, and I've walked thousands of clients through this. But I'm going to give you an example of how this whole thing really comes together. And it's more than money. So one of my first clients that I obtained after I figured all this out in 1994, basically it was 1994, he had just gotten married. His dad was a mentor of mine and very close to me and made a huge impact on my life. And his son got married, and he and his wife called me and said, hey, mom and dad told me to give you a call where, we're looking at, want to start setting ourselves up for financial success in the future. And these were kids, right? They were 22, 23 years old. And so we set them up on a small plan based on their budget at the time. About 5 years later, they called me and said, hey, we need $12,000. We're going to buy this business. We're going to fly out to Phoenix. We're going to have education on how to use this software. And then we're going to go into the medical billing business. So we borrow money against the cash value. They had some life insurance. They had some savings. We borrowed the cash value of their life insurance, took a $12,000 loan. They paid for the software. They paid for a week out in Phoenix, the training, et cetera. And it took them about 2 years to get their first client. But then they started getting some revenue, and they used that revenue to pay back the loans that they had taken. Then as time went by, they were saving more and more money because now they had this business was gaining revenue almost on a monthly basis. And right now they're making about $200,000 a year just on that business.
Mm-hmm.
But about 6 or 7 years after that, they came to me and said, hey, we have 2 children. They had 2 children at that time. Their oldest was 10 and their youngest was 6. And their goal was they wanted to build a mountain home so that when they retired, or actually when their youngest was finished with college, which, by the way, she would have graduated last year in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing their situation and knowing how they were using some of their other money inefficiently, I said to them, if I were to tell you that you could do this today, when would you get started on building the mountain home? And they said, there's no way we could do this. I said, oh no, you could do it. It's within your cash flow. It won't change your cash flow by 1 penny. In fact, you'll be able to save an extra $500 per month. They just said, sign me up. So we started the process. This was in February. They broke ground. They purchased the land in June. They broke ground in July. And they, over the next 2 years, they built this cabin. So fast forward about 10 years ago, his father passed away. And they lived about 2 hours away from where my office is, or my home is. So I went down to the funeral, and at the funeral, the the son or the husband came to me and said, "Hey, thanks for everything." And I said, "Oh, gee, Mike, I your dad was an incredible mentor of mine. I owe whatever success I've accomplished in life. I partly owe some or most of it to him." And he goes, "No, I'm not talking about that." He said, "For everything you've done for Liz and I." And I said, "Oh, well, geez, you did all the hard lifting. I just told you how to do it. And you guys put the money away." He goes, "You don't get it, do you?" And this was another one of those epiphany moments. He said, "Every board in that cabin, my dad and I pounded the nails into every board. If it weren't for you, I never would have had that time with my dad."
Oh my God. Oh,
I'm getting chills just talking about this.
I'm getting choked up thinking about that. Yeah.
And
it's beautiful.
He said, yeah. And he said, what you do is more than money. And that's when there was another epiphany. It's like, you know what? There is a lot to this, and it is way more than money.
It's halftime here at the Play Your Position podcast, and we've got ourselves a great game. While you're up grabbing another snack and topping off your favorite beverage, make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss another play. PYP is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever great podcasts can be found. Now, let's get back to the game.
Yeah, you're talking about legacy. You're talking about, when we use the word legacy, it's often affiliated with money, like, how much you're going to leave behind and where's it going to go and all that stuff. But legacy to me is something that we can and really should. I know we're not supposed to should on ourselves, but you should live as much of your legacy as you can so you can enjoy it. And building a mountain home with your dad or your son or your daughter or grandchildren or whatever, that's a project that will live on forever. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Maine Cabin Masters, that show, HGTV.
Yeah.
My family has a place in Maine that my father built in 1976. My parents bought the land in 69. We camped on it as kids. In 76, my dad had always had a dream since he was a little boy to build a camp. And he did, with my mother's help and my brother and I, as we could, as children, carrying this and that. But your client's story of that, there's so many of those out there. When you watch a show like Maine Cabin Masters, when you hear you tell this story, it just reminds us all that life really is so much more. Now, you need money. Money it's not like, oh, we don't have to have money at all. No, money is a tool. And money opens doors and allows us to live our legacies through whatever projects make sense to us. It could be a trip around the world. It could be flying down to a third world country and doing charity work, building wells, or, there's all kinds of visions that people have. And money's important for those things. But you're right, Tim, it is not everything. What he remembers is pounding the nails in the wood, not the money that allowed them, he's not thinking about piles of cash. He's thinking about hanging out with his dad and problem solving together and watching this thing come to life and then enjoying it, I imagine, together.
Oh, absolutely. And again, like he said, every weekend, him and his wife and his mom and dad would go up to the cabin and, they did everything. They cleared they cleared the land, they pounded the nails in the cabin. And I mean, it was, and in the beginning, they were sleeping in tents. And then as time went by, Mary Lou, if you could see, they showed me a picture, because they've made a couple additions to the cabin over the years. It is breathtaking. It is so awesome. And so their goal is they're going to sell their house and then live up there when they retire. And they're not too far from retirement. They're going to probably retire in about 7 or 8 years.
Yeah. So let's talk about retirement, because some of the work you do certainly has to do with that, whether you're working with a family business and you're looking at succession things. But to me, retirement is also a concept that has been sold to us in a certain way. And I don't know if it's as relevant as it once was in the way that it was sold. So could you talk to us about your understanding, the concept of retirement through the lens of what you do?
So we focus on financial independence rather than retirement because, there's a lot of people who may never retire.
Exactly.
And, they love what they're doing. They love who they're doing it with. And in case either of those variables change, they can't see themselves stopping doing what they're doing. And that's fine. But then there's other people who, their goal is, hey, when I hit 60 or 62 or 65 or whatever that magical year is or age, I'm done. And for them, that's something different. But here's the point. The system has conditioned us to accept as normal things that benefit the system and are to our detriment.
Yes.
And because of that, we have these maybe unrealistic expectations or maybe unrealistic goals that probably aren't achievable. And they're certainly not achievable under using conventional wisdom again.
Yeah. Boo, conventional wisdom.
Well, so I have a friend, and he's passed away a few years now, but he used to say, "Show me one time when conventional wisdom was right."
Yeah, right. Could you?
I can't.
No, me either. And what I want to emphasize something you just said, Tim, because I think it's so important. We need to really burn this into our brains, and that is these conventional wisdom serves the system. It does not serve us. And it's only through trial and error. It's only through being in a situation where you're fortunate enough to have an epiphany like you've had. And I think I certainly have had epiphanies along the way, and I'm sure listeners have too, where you realized, oh my gosh, this is the missing link. And when you went in that direction, it changed everything for you for the better, right? Not that before was bad per se. It just wasn't working. It's not like your life stunk being paycheck to paycheck. You had a nice house. You were bringing in money. You're putting money away, but I think you used the word plateau. You were you were on a hamster wheel.
And you don't even realize it. So two things to underscore exactly what you just said, Mary Lou. The first is, I look back now and realize that growing up and, when I was in college, I was poor. I didn't realize how poor I was until I got to college.
Yeah.
Because, everybody around us was in the same,
yes,
lower middle class, upper lower class financial situation, right? But so I didn't realize how poor we were until I got to college and I saw, kids who had their own, at the time, a $20,000 car.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, $20,000 car isn't going to buy you much today. Believe me, back when I was in college, you could.
That was a nice car.
That was probably like 3-4 years of college.
Yep,
depending on where you went.
It was. Yeah.
So a lot of times you're so conditioned that you don't realize. And the other thing is, I'll give you an example of a client who was doing really well. He didn't think he needed my services at all. And he only reluctantly agreed to meet with me because the person who referred me to him was a really good friend of his. So we had a strong mutual acquaintance. And so I meet with this guy and he tells me flat out, I have no problem meeting with you, but just so you understand, I have 2 financial advisors and I meet with my CPA every month. If there was anything that I should know, I'm sure they would have told me about it. And I said, well, how about if we meet? And the worst thing that's going to come out of this is we have a very close mutual friend and we'll both gain a new friend. He said, that sounds reasonable. So I go to meet with him and, sure enough, he's got a business with 4 locations. He owns the real estate on all those locations. He's had almost $1 million in his retirement account. He was making, he didn't tell me at this point, but I knew, I came to find out about 10 minutes later that he was making over $600,000 per year.
Okay.
And things were going pretty well. So we started talking about his debt, and he said he had 2 business loans and a credit line. And I said, were those business loans to buy equipment for each of your locations? And he said, he just started laughing. He said, no, I pay my quarterly taxes and I usually draw on a credit line to do that. And I said, wait, so let me guess. You draw on the credit line, then you pay back half of what you owed, and then the next quarter comes up and you got to borrow the whole thing again. And you just keep doing that. And then the bank terms out the loan. He goes, yeah, exactly. And I said, both of those loans were for quarterly taxes? He said, yeah. And I said, you also have an open line. Yeah, I'm using that to pay my taxes. So again, the system conditioned him to do things in a certain way, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So,
and not a smart way.
Well, no, but it certainly wasn't to his advantage.
No.
So my next question to him was, when you graduated college, what kind of income were you shooting for? And he's a few years, 10 years younger than me. And he said, about 150, 200. And I said, how much are you making? He said, a little over 650. And I just started laughing. He goes, what's so funny? I said, well, I said, isn't it ironic? You're making 3 and 4 times what you ever thought you could make, and you can't pay your quarterly taxes without drawing on a credit line? And he looked at me and he said, I never thought of it that way, but now that you say that, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So my response to him was, looks like you got everything under control. But if there's a way that you would never have to pay your quarterly taxes ever again by borrowing on a credit line, would you spend 45 minutes of your time to learn how you can do that? He said, absolutely. So this was in the summer of 2019. This is where it gets really good. So we put the plan together in October of 2019. He filed his 2019 taxes on extension and texted me when he left his CPA's office. And I memorized the text because he said, this is what it was. Tim, just want you to know I'm leaving my CPA's office. We had enough money to pay my 2019 tax liability. We have enough money set aside for my September quarterlies, January quarterlies, and what we think we're going to owe for 2020 in April of 2021. Thanks for everything you do for me and my family.
Wow.
Now, if that's all there was to the story, it's a pretty good story.
Yeah, it is, but it doesn't end there, I can tell.
It does not. So think of this. In 9 months, he'll never have to borrow on a credit line again, ever, to pay his quarterly taxes. Now, here's where it gets even better. So those first 2 financial advisors, well, they're gone. So I'm the guy. And I meet with him and his CPA in December of 2022, this past December. And I know what he has saved with me, but I didn't know he now has 7 locations to his business instead of 4. And what I didn't know is because of the concepts that I taught him, he's now in a position where he's saving cash flow and money is building up inside each one of these locations. Between what he has with me and those 7 businesses, he has $1.8 million of cash.
Oh my God.
Now, this is in 3 years. Nothing's
That's amazing.
Changed.
Yeah.
Nothing's changed except how he was using his money.
Right.
And so that to me, this guy didn't want to see me. because he was so conditioned, like, hey, I got everything under control. I'm doing everything right because the experts told me I'm doing it this way.
Yeah. Wow. Well, if that story isn't inspirational, I don't know what is. And it just reinforces to me, the 30,000 foot view concept of don't take things at face value. Don't just fall into line because everybody else is doing it. Question conventional wisdom. Question, even if you end up continuing down because it ends up being the best, at least you know that you explored other options. And there's always going to be another way to look at something. There is. And you are proof of that. You happen to be in the financial segment of life in terms of that's what you teach. You can help people develop a different mindset. And you're really in the business of education, and money and all that stuff is secondary. It's you're helping people think differently. And then the tools, just if you learn how to use the tools in a different way, it's like, I didn't know I could build that with this. Yeah. So thank you, Tim, for one, being a contrarian, because I'm a contrarian, and so are many of my guests here. Is we don't march to the beat of the mass drum, and also for caring about people and their families. Wanting to do right by folks, and showing up with information and tools and systems that are doable. You're not presenting something that's so pie in the sky, but I think it's interesting how this client you just described to his own, well, I thought I had, I was going along and doing everything, and that, how many people are that way? Or they just, well, I'm following along. This is what I'm supposed to do, right? I'm not doing too badly. Yeah,
Right.
but what if you could do better? What would that look like? $1.8 million cash in the bank? Hello? That's not too shabby.
One last thing here. When we ran everything past this guy's accountant at the time, the accountant said, I'm embarrassed.
Oh, wow.
And I said, why? He said, why didn't I know this? And here was my reply to him. I said, Brian, everything I told you or everything I showed our client, you knew intuitively, correct? He said, yeah. I said, you just weren't trained to find it.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't trained to look at it through a different lens. See, the lens that I look at things through is through the lens of me or my clients being in control of their own money. And when you look at things through that lens, everything changes. Your decisions become much more easier, much more clear, because now it's like, should I do this with my money? Well, let me see. Am I going to be in control of my money, or will somebody else? Oh, somebody else? Okay, I won't do that. It's so simple, but you have to sort of understand how to look at things through a different lens.
Yeah, which is what you do, and you do it well, and you have lots of success stories that back that up, and you yourself have experienced it. And I like that too. You mentioned that earlier. You walk your talk, Tim. You're not just somebody who's hung a shingle out and watched a couple of YouTube videos and said, okay, you have a long history. It hasn't always, you yourself got lulled into conventional wisdom. Who among us hasn't?
Yeah.
Who, right? It's just the way it is. And it's when you have those epiphanies because of a conversation, maybe some listeners today, that's the goal. Or maybe think about your business, your money slightly differently, which leads me to my next question. Where do you hang out online? Where can people learn more about you and your services and your upcoming podcast?
So we are at www.tier1capital. It's TIER, the digit 1, CAPITAL.com. And we have a free gift for the Play Your Position podcast. So if you go to tier1capital.com/PYP, we'll provide you with our research report on the 3 disturbing trends that threaten small business owners and put the next generation at risk.
Awesome. That's such a generous gift. And team, I hope you take advantage of this. There will be a link to that gift on Tim's show notes page at pyppodcast.com, along with his website, tier1capital.com. And he's also going to share here in a minute some books. But before that, could you give a little hint about something that many people might not think of as a threat that's looming out there or that exists right now?
So I would say, and this is difficult in today's times, question everything you see and hear, whether it's from me or anybody else, because there is so much disinformation out there on everything. There is no, if you're watching the news, the nightly news, man, that is such a huge mistake. There is nothing true on there at all.
Yep.
So I would definitely say today more than ever, you have to question whether it's authority, whether it's conventional wisdom. You definitely have to. I was born. I guess I was always a natural born cynic. So I never believed anything anyone told me. I had to figure all that stuff out for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that was good, and sometimes that was bad. But I think in the end, it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I would say so. And speaking of guidance, what are a couple of books, Tim, that have been instrumental for you on your leadership journey?
Well, I would say, the book right now that I use as almost as a Bible, it's called The Ultimate Sales Machine. It's Chet Holmes. And I actually engaged Chet Holmes International to do some research for me. And that's been very instrumental in opening my eyes as to, the potential that's out there, both personally as well as, from a business perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yes, The Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes. I'll put a link to that on your show notes page. Are there any other books that you have found you've turned to over the years, or that you just read and loved? It could be nonfiction, fiction, other.
Yeah. So a recent book that I read and I loved, it's called Good Calorie, Bad Calorie.
Okay.
I don't know the author offhand, but it gives it's a thick book. It's a good read, but it really gives you a lot of information as to what we should be eating and how we should be eating. And one of the things that I will tell you is it's another one of those situations where what we're being told by the FDA and the food pyramid and all that stuff is probably not the right thing for us personally.
Yeah. I think I've heard of that book. And I remember one time either reading something about it or that not every calories are not created equal. So like if you drink, like a calorie in a big gulp is not the same as a calorie in a yam, right? Or a bean or a piece of cheese. It's like there's a chemistry to some of the that's a conversation for another day. But thank you for sharing that book, because I believe if we're not taking care as leaders of ourselves, if we're not taking care of our health, what's the point? You got to put your health. You've got to learn, and you do have to question conventional wisdom about that as well. So that's awesome. It ties right in with everything we've talked about today, Tim. And as we wind things down here, what could you leave us here at Team PYP with to take away?
Yeah, so I always feel that if you continue to focus on your strengths and hone your strengths, I think that is so much more valuable than trying to take a weakness and make that a strength. And again, it might be the path of least resistance, but at the end of the day, I think at the results will be much, much more dramatic if you just keep honing your strengths. And that's something I wish I had learned a long time ago.
Hey team, Mary Lou here. Who's number one in football changes from year to year. Fashion trends come and go, same with musical tastes. But leadership skills, they never go out of style. In fact, these days, leadership is an essential survival skill for a world that demands more from us than ever before. To succeed these days, you need to know how to show up for yourself so that you can then do the work you love with people you like the way you want. The Play Your Position Leadership Playbook helps you do this, and it's free. Go to pyppodcast.com to download your copy today. If being more successful this year, next year, in the 21st century is on your to-do list, get your copy of the Play Your Position Leadership Playbook now. pyppodcast.com. It's at the top of the page. You can't miss it. That's pyppodcast.com, and start being more of the leader you are meant to be today.
This podcast was produced by Daniel Romeros. Show notes for this episode can be found over at pyppodcast.com. I'm Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks for listening.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.